Hello and welcome to the Arcade Trivia Game Show! Today's contestants will be competing for over 3 billion pixels in prizes! So without further ado, on to the first question.
What was the original name for Blaster? A. Big Blaster, B. Master Blaster, or C. Blaster Master?
Right answer, wrong order. The name that we wanted to use was Master Blaster, and we discovered at the time that there was a pinball simulation program called Billy Budge's Raster Blaster available for the Apple computer, so decided to change the name to avoid confusion. We pondered and toiled for a couple of weeks to come up with a better name for the game, and in frustration ended up just simply shortening it to Blaster.
Only about 1,000 Blaster arcade games were made before the great video game crash of 83-84 put a freeze on the industry. How many sit-down cabinets were finished? A. 3, B. 30, or C. 103?
Nice try, but no cigar. Three. One is on display at my dad's house in Palo Alto. The other game, well, actually the second game, was converted into a Devastator game, which is a very limited edition prototype. And there have been unconfirmed sightings of the third game. Its actual whereabouts are unknown at this time.
In addition to the normal wood cabinet and sit-down version, some blasters had cylindrical plastic cabinets called Duramold. Why weren't more of these neat plastic contraptions produced? A. They were flammable. B. Their pungent odor repelled customers. Or C. They shrunk.
Hey, you can light my fire, but there's no way you can burn a Duramold. Duramold unfortunately had its tendency to shrink and was only used in 2 games, Blaster and Bubbles. Now normally this exhibited itself in a shrinkage that made the coin door hard to open. But actually in one game it was reported that the shrinkage increased the internal pressure of the cabinet so much that the monitor was ejected across the arcade and impaled a Donkey Kong Jr. machine. Fortunately, there were no other injuries.
Finished in 1983, Blaster was the third and final game, after Defender 2 and Robotron, that Eugene Jarvis and Larry DeMar's VidKids company produced. It was originally conceived as an Atari 800 game. Upon completion of the game for Atari, Eugene and Larry A. were told to add dancing girls to the game before Atari would pay them. B. were able to get one of the last checks from Atari. Or C. were instructed to program a port to the Timex Sinclair.
Takes the licking and keeps on ticking, but you still got it wrong. Well, the day after we cashed the check, Atari supernovaed, and Jack Tramiel fired 90% of the workforce in the great video game crash. Unfortunately, not a single remaining Atari employee knew of the existence of the Blaster project, and Blaster forever vanished into the rubble of the great video game debacle.
Creating one of the earliest first-person shooting games with a 3D perspective in 1983 was a technical feat. It took a year to create the game. Which of the following was one of Blaster's biggest technical challenges? A. Unreliable ROM burners. B. Lack of scaling hardware. Or C. Mice chewing through the unit power supply.
While we have a lot of mice at Williams, their appetite seems to be chewing through the garbage and not on the power supplies. Unreliable ROM burners? Ridiculous! Doing a first-person flying game in 1983 without any scaling or rotating computer hardware is quite a challenge. Particularly, it meant that each pixel of each image had to be hand-drawn in each size and in each rotation that it was displayed in the game. This caused thousands of hours of artist time to be necessary to generate all of the artwork that you see in the game.
What features were originally street tested for Blaster but left out of the production version? A. An arcade shaking subwoofer for sound effects. B. A bonus round where you shoot caricatures of the programmers. Or C. 30 levels instead of 20 with buy-in capability.
While management often wants to shoot the programmers, there were no caricatures in Blaster. While Blaster was one of the first games to use stereo sound, there was no subwoofer in the game. After initial testing, the ability to buy in and continue your game when it was over by inserting additional money was removed from the game. At the same time, the game was shortened from 30 stages to 20 stages to make it possible to complete it on one coin. At this time, there was a stage called Outer Space, which among other things had this gargantuanly large Starship Enterprise that would just fly over your head for about 3 miles, and that whole stage was removed at this time.
What was the processor speed of the Blaster 6809 chip? A. 25 MHz, B. 200 MHz, or C. 1 MHz?
No dice. Nope. Even though it may take 2 minutes for your 266 MHz Pentium 2 to boot up, Blaster was programmed, believe it or not, with a 1 MHz chip. And man, did it hurt.
Root Beer Tapper was originally known as just Tapper and initially conceived as a video game that would just be sold to bars. It was an officially licensed product of what company? A. Budweiser, B. Pabst Blue Ribbon, or C. Old Style?
That'd be Budweiser, and the way that came about was Scott and I came up with an idea for a bar game, and we were intrigued by the idea of sliding beers and empty mugs down a bar, and what kind of action you could get with a bartender and some angry customers or some happy customers. And we did some initial design work on that, and we went to Bally Midway. And there was a fellow at Bally Midway who was very good at getting licenses. I think his name was Tom Neiman. And he went out and talked to Budweiser in St. Louis, got them excited, and we all went down and talked to them some more, and Budweiser was on board.
The Tapper arcade game included what unique features to attract the beer-drinking video game players? A. Side-mounted pony keg, B. Towel dispenser and coin door that doubled as a bottle opener, or C. Mounted cup holders and brass rail footrest?
Sorry, Wrong. Bally Midway at the time had really good cabinet people, so we suggested a cabinet that looked like a bar. They put a brass rail at the bottom of the cabinet where you could rest your foot while you're sitting on a stool playing the game. They put metal cup holders on the control panel where you could rest your drink, preferably a Budweiser. And the Budweiser tappers looked like, or the tappers to pour beer actually looked like Budweiser tappers. For the root beer version, they changed the cabinet just slightly, where they put some extra stickers on the cabinet to say root beer, and that they changed the Budweiser logos to root beer logos.
Tapper was first play-tested in public at what Rush Street bar in Chicago? A. T.J. McGillicuddy's, B. The Snuggery, or C. The Czar Bar?
Get with it. Where are you from? Well, we tested Tapper first in the Snuggery, and that was a new kind of testing for us. We'd previously only tested in arcades, and so I think Scott and I really enjoyed an opportunity to go test this in the evenings at the Snuggery, and it was exciting for us to watch players who were having a good time in the bar kind of wander over and get excited about a beer drinking game, a Budweiser game, and we enjoyed watching them, and we learned a lot from those initial tests. We knew we had a winner when we watched people play.
Game designer Scott Morrison listened to what group of bands joined the creation of Tapper that went on to inspire Tapper's third bar? A. REO Speedwagon, Loverboy, Night Ranger and Journey. B. Kenny Rogers, the Gatlin Brothers, Jimmy Buffett and Jerry Reed. Or C. Devo, the Talking Heads, the Ramones and the Dead Kennedys.
I've always had sort of an eclectic taste in music. In college I got into a lot of alternative stuff. I was a big fan of Devo and Talking Heads, the Ramones. I used to listen to that a lot in my office while I was designing the characters. I had a lot of fun putting safety pins through their heads and mohawks on the characters. And most of the other designers on the project didn't really care for that kind of stuff, so I tried to keep it to myself as much as possible. But it was kind of fun to bring the music scene of the time and put it into the video game. It kind of dates the whole piece.
Tapper programmer Steve Meyer also worked on what other quirky early 80s video games? A. A game where you must frantically set up dominoes. B. A game where you play a logger who rolls logs, chops down trees and tries to knock trees into other loggers. Or C. All of the above.
Well, we worked on several together. The first one was Domino Man. I had a minor role in that, but I think Rich and Elaine Ditton were really the drivers on that one. And then after that I worked on a game called Wacko with Scott. We were matching aliens and mismatching aliens, and it was really a lot of fun. You get some interesting combinations. I still look back and I like that game very, very much. And then we came up with an interesting idea of a two-player competitive game, which was one of the first. There were a few that preceded it, but you were a logger and you were playing against another logger trying to knock trees on each other. And we had a log rolling round in there, and we really had a lot of fun with that one. It was almost in the same vein as Tapper, but a little bit different play mechanics. So we worked on some interesting stuff.
Tapper has an Easter egg that displays the creator's initials when you do the following. Hold all joysticks and Tapper handles in the down position and push the 1 and 2 player start buttons at the same time. This trick will only work when the game's in what mode? A. The cowboy bar. B. The attract mode. Or C. The bonus round.
Nope, try again. That's not it. Back in those days, creators of games were really not allowed to put their names or credits into the game, so we kind of snuck it in as an Easter egg. We really weren't supposed to, but we did anyways. During the attract scene, while the word Tapper is filling up with liquid, either beer or root beer, if you're holding all the controls down and press the player 1 start and player 2 start at the same time, our credits will come up on the screen.
What innovative feature was created but never made it to the final version of the game? A. A tournament competition version of the game that dispensed beer every time you won a round. B. A molded plastic cabinet shaped like a beer can. Or C. A digitized sound chip that emitted recorded burps from the programmers drinking beer.
We're designing all the characters for the game. We had a lot of fun animations, and after they would drink the beers, some of them would burp. We thought, wouldn't that be a kick to have a burp sound in the game? So we contacted Texas Instruments to see if they had any kind of speech chips that we could do to use for the game. They had a speech specialist at the time who brought us over to their office, supplied us with a six-pack of beer. We all sat around a microphone drinking beer and belching into it, and we ended up with a pretty neat chip full of our belches. We put it in the game, and after almost every beer they would belch, and it was very, very funny, but it got pretty obnoxious, and we all decided that Budweiser probably wouldn't be too thrilled with the idea, so we scrapped it.
Although the rights to Henry Mancini's Peter Gunn theme were bought for inclusion in a digitized soundtrack for Spy Hunter arcade game, another song was originally sought after and programmed into the prototype machine until it was determined that licensing costs for the music would be too much. Which song was originally used?
No way! Get out of here! Well, originally it was going to be the James Bond theme because Bill Adams, who was running the software group at the time, and I were both huge James Bond fans. And we had gone to Japan, and I'd picked up a tape of James Bond's greatest hits. And the very first time we brought the game up, I mean, it was really, the entire game was very, very James Bond inspired. But the game played with the James Bond theme for many months until we couldn't get the rights, at which point one of the marketing guys suggested Peter Gunn, which was something we weren't terribly familiar with, but you know, it did the trick.
The car in Spy Hunter, the G6155 CIA prototype interceptor, the numbers stand for designer George Gomez's birth date, was modeled after a real car that George Gomez owned at the time. It was also featured in promotional brochure photography for Spy Hunter. The car was A. a 1977 Gremlin, B. a 1983 Ferrari, or C. a 1983 Z28.
The car was a 1983 Z28, which I had just gotten, and I'm a huge car nut, so I actually wanted to do lots of different cars, and one of the problems was that we really had tremendous limitations. I mean, you know, 32 by 32 pixel picture blocks, two of them stacked to draw the car. Couldn't get a lot of, you really couldn't get a lot of anything that looked like any real car. Originally I wanted it to be something even flashier, and we couldn't get it in. So the red, my car was red, the red didn't look great either. So we ended up with a white car that showed up really well, had some red and blue stripes on it.
Designer George Gomez said that at Midway in the early 80s, the only pressure the game designers really had was the pressure they put on themselves, because Midway, A. had forgotten their development group existed because it was located off-site, B. didn't think video games would ever be as profitable as pinball after the great video game crash of 83-84, or C. was living off a gravy train of Japanese licensed games, which at one point saw them cranking out almost 1,200 Pac-Man games a day.
You have to remember that it was a time when the company was doing tremendously well with Japanese game licenses. You know, we're making 1,200 Pac-Man a day, and that's not an exaggeration, you know. So it was a time when, you know, an internal development group made up of guys that just really wanted to make games. We were just kind of, you know, they put us in a warehouse off-site, kind of forgot about us. And you know, basically there was the pressure was we wanted to make really cool games, but they had plenty of product to put on an assembly line. It's a little different than today, where we actually, you know, we need, when a game designer has a product in development, that product is expected to make it to market. So the pressure was a little different.
What third Spy Hunter chase sequence was deleted for lack of time and memory? A. an alpine ski chase sequence, B. a helicopter chase, or C. an F-14 fighter sequence?
Well, I'm a big skier, so I wouldn't have said no to that. When we start doing a game, we typically throw in the kitchen sink before reality intrudes, and so this game had everything that you've ever seen in a spy movie, and the transformation to the boat, and then was supposed to be followed by a transformation to a flying device, something like the helicopter, so you could go head to head with the enemy helicopter that is such a bastard in the game.
Why did Joust 2 have a vertical monitor? A. To increase dive bombing action. B. Because it was originally intended as a kit game. Or C. Williams had a surplus of vertical cabinets in 1985 and needed a game to fill them.
No, I don't think that'd work at all. Joust came out with a vertical monitor because it was during a time period when dedicated videos were having a great deal of difficulty. So Joust 2 is supposed to be a kit to retrofit various games out in the field. At that time, most of the games in the field were vertical monitors, like Pac-Man, Ms. Pac-Man, etc. It also seemed like the vertical screen would give the player more height so that they could fly and open up some new play possibilities. And for lack of any other reason, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
The transform button turns a player's character into a Pegasus. What's the best way to utilize this new character? A. Attacking enemies on solid ground. B. Flying straight into the lava. Or C. Picking up eggs.
The fun of the Pegasus is that you have to choose at what times to strategically become an ostrich and a Pegasus. The advantage is that an ostrich moves faster in the air but isn't as strong on the ground. Pegasus, being a much more stout beast, is when you're on the ground, if there's a tie, you're both on the same level, it wins. But if you're fighting in the air, it's sinking like a rock, so you're almost always higher than the Pegasus. So you need to decide which character you want to use and when.
What famous artist served as design inspiration for Joust 2? A. Salvador Dali. B. M.C. Escher. Or C. Norman Rockwell.
It's an easy question. My favorite artist is M.C. Escher, and Escher is famous for doing the drawings and sketches of three-dimensional objects forming out of two-dimensional space, and so that's why you see a lot of the buzzards falling out of the background and things of that nature. And just as a plus for me is we both share the same birthday.
Splat had a non-shooting style of gameplay which led to the introduction of what unique feature? A. Projectile vomiting. B. Characters with removable heads. Or C. Burp bombs.
Every day, but not in this game. The unique feature is that your character can take 2 hits instead of 1 before he dies. Now, really the best way to show the significance of this strategy is to demonstrate it. Now, suppose this were a Splat character, and you're throwing food, but now he takes a hit. Like that. Now, if he takes a hit, then that means that his head comes off. But he can go around and try to find his head, and he's still in the game. However, if he takes another hit, then you're still dead.
What film was one of the main inspirations behind Splat? A. Animal House. B. Porky's. Or C. Revenge of the Nerds.
Revenge of the Nerds. Is Kevin Bacon in that? I guess not. Nope. Good try, but nope, not Porky's. The inspiration for Splat had a lot to do with John Belushi's big scene in Animal House. It was a good time, it was a lot of fun, and I thought just a food fight would make a really good game. And then, you know, it might just be me, but I think, I don't know, this is potentially funny to me. I don't know.
Congratulations, you won! For playing, you'll receive a trip to our arcade media gallery, where you'll enjoy many fantastic arcade sites. And so, until next time, it's goodbye. Hello and welcome to the Arcade Trivia Game Show! Today's contestants will be competing for over 3 billion pixels in prizes! So without further ado, on to the first question.
What was the original